This is the Lou Rockwell Show.
What an honor it is today to have Naomi Wolf with us. Ms. Wolf is author of 7 books, an outspoken defender of liberty, especially in this era of the Bush administration. And in her last book, The End of America, she laid out the path to fascism that America's been taking in these most recent years. Naomi, tell us about just how far are we down that path?
Wow. Well, the answer to that changes day by day, and it especially changes depending on how many Americans are waking up and taking action. But since I wrote The End of America, since it came out last fall, I think last fall we were at sort of a quarter to midnight, and really in the last 2 weeks we're a few minutes past midnight, in the sense that while we still obviously have all the structures of civil society in place, while we still obviously have nominal elections and a judiciary and newspapers publishing, we also have seen the last kind of 2 steps put in place by the administration, which leads us one beat away, one action step away from martial law. I've been saying since October 1st that technically a coup has occurred, and let me tell you exactly what I mean. It's a Rovian coup, so it's very slow motion and incremental. But on October 1st, the last step of the 10 steps to fascism is that the executive or the leader makes it easier to declare martial law and starts to simply subvert the rule of law. So for a year I've been warning people about the Defense Authorization Act of 2007, which gives the president the power to simply declare a national emergency because he says so, and then he can federalize the National Guard or deploy Blackwater in basically a state of martial law. Well, he doesn't even have to do that right now because he, with a signing statement, subverted limitations that Congress tried to put on the Defense Authorization Act, and thus did an end run around posse comitatus, which has protected us, along with the Insurrection Act for 200 years from the prospect of soldiers on our streets. And now he's deployed the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division from Iraq to somewhere in the United States of America. So while we haven't seen soldiers on our streets or stationed outside our polling places or stationed outside or inside the halls of Congress, as a student of history, it is very alarming that he's done this because it's got many, many implications that we might not see at first or we might not want to believe at first. But they're definitely, if he, moves further, which he can, since they're answerable to him and not to Congress, not to the governors, not to the people. They have to answer to him. It will be, how can I put this? Once the troops are deployed, it doesn't matter what people think or feel. We're not in democracy time anymore. We're really in a state of emergency where we don't have time to deliberate. We don't have time to file lawsuits. We don't have time to, vote the bums out because things happen at a much accelerated pace.
Well, it's extraordinary that Americans still continue to think we're the freest country in the world. Fascism, of course, has been so long an epithet that people maybe forget that it's an actual political philosophy. And we have the militarism, the belligerent nationalism, the leader principle, the suppression of civil liberties, all the rest of the marks, as you've written, of a fascist state. And yet Americans still, don't you think most Americans still think of this as the freest country in the world, quite crazily?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's kind of for a good reason. I think that Karl Rove, I have no smoking gun that it's him, but many reasons to believe that he's kind of the evil genius behind this. Someone influential in this administration has studied history, and what's so brilliant about the way they're setting up an infrastructure of a police state is that they're doing it kind of behind a Disneyland facade of democracy. And a constitutional republic. And by the way, I want to give a shout out to libertarians who have educated me that I must be careful in my wording and remind people that we're a constitutional republic, or we're supposed to be. So they're really kind of moving. It's like the Wizard of Oz. It's like don't look at the man behind the curtain. We're being directed certainly to pay attention to a celebrity culture and a consumer culture while it lasts, but we're also directed at a kind of what I've discovered in Give Me Liberty to be a kind of fake patriotism. We've been I learned, bombarded with 30 years of a mythology messaging about fake patriotism in order to get us to accept what I've discovered is, in many ways, a fake democracy. That there have been obstacles put in the way of the citizen leadership that I discovered from my research in Give Me Liberty. The founders really, and by that I mean the whole founding generation, ordinary people as well as well-known ones, wanted us as Americans to show. So, yeah, we're being constantly told this is the freest nation on earth, this is the strongest democracy on earth. Meanwhile, I discovered that, our elections are such a mess that Jimmy Carter Center we don't even qualify as one of the nations in the developing world. We're not as improved in our election process as developing world nations to qualify to get the Carter Center to monitor our vote or other independent monitors to watch our vote. I discovered other things. We're told that any American can run for office. Well, I tried to put in place a number of those promises that the founders meant for American citizens to be able to make good on. And there's a section in the book where I'm like trying to get a friend to run for Senate in Virginia, and I find out that the information we need is kind of locked away in this language that's entirely impenetrable, and there are no resources to find out how to translate it to avoid getting arrested, I should say to avoid getting in trouble with the FEC if we move forward. There's like this other place where I try to hold a rally in Union Square in support of the Constitution, and 15 minutes in, I learned that what I'm doing is illegal because it's a crime to stage a rally in a public place in New York using a bullhorn, because there's been this silent over-permiticization process for 30 years that I had no idea about to keep us from using our First Amendment rights of speech and assembly. And on. I think about registering my neighbors to vote, and I discover I could be risking a $5,000 fine if I, get a name spelled wrong, because unfortunately this is mostly Republican, but it would be just as despicable from any group. There's this sustained effort to criminalize, and penalize voter registration and the voting process. And I went through this whole set of blocks, this whole kind of armature of this fake democracy, and I discovered that, the one place where they welcomed my service to my country with open arms and the whole process was transparent and supportive and written in clear English was when I went into an Army recruiting station and tried to find out about the process of serving in the war in Iraq. We have to wake the people up to understanding that we're being, deliberately propagandized and brainwashed to accept a more and more limited role as citizens, and really messaging to make us give up our seat at the table because it serves the vested interests who are threatened by citizens knowing how to use their rights, their liberties, and knowing how practically and powerfully to organize to defend them. As
a libertarian, I've long been disdainful of conservatives and their promotion of war and the police state, even going back to Bill Buckley in the 1950s. But I remember being astounded, even I, as cynical as I can be, astounded in the Reagan years, and it certainly has accelerated since then, that when these people say America, or when they refer to somebody as being anti-American, by America they mean the presidential state, the warfare state, the spying state. When they say you're anti-American, they mean you're differing with U.S. foreign policy and U.S. domestic security policy.
That's very well put.
So it's another alarming trend. Certainly this is no longer a free country by the standards of the founders or even more recent standards.
Certainly not by the standards of the founders. And can you educate me a little more, please? Because obviously I guess I'm on a learning curve where I'm discovering that while I was raised kind of on the progressive side just because of where I was born and where I grew up and my demographic, I think I've been a secret libertarian for many years in many, many ways. Do you have a working definition that you like of libertarian, and can you share it with me? And also, why aren't more conservatives and more libertarians challenging this kind of hijacking of the meaning of Americanness?
Well, libertarians in one sense are people who agree with Lord Acton that the highest political virtue is liberty. And it's the view that voluntary society is morally and practically the best form of society, and that the state is, as Murray put it, a gang of thieves writ large. The state is able to do all those things that are illegal and properly illegal for us in